Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. I'm Russell Redding and this is Renewable Roundup from Zygo Network. I'm super excited this week because I have a brilliant guest. Pascal Olin from Alight has agreed to join me and talk about on-site. This is a really hot topic at the moment, so I'm very excited that he's agreed to join me and share the benefits of his experience. Let's get stuck in. Pascal, good morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm super. Yeah, the sun is shining today, and I'm very happy. Like I said, I really appreciate you joining us this week. Before we start, do you just want to give me a quick overview of you and Alight? Obviously, I know you, but I guess quite a few of the listeners might benefit from that.
Of course, of course. So my name is Pascal Olin. I work for Alight, and Alight is a leading solar and BESS developer and independent power producer of grid-connected solar in the Nordics. But for the context of this session, we're also a specialized developer and operator of on-site solar installations across selected European markets. And myself, I've been working with on-site solar for the last 6 years, and I've been sort of supporting large corporates from initial business case to on-site solar installation in actually 5 countries spread across Europe. So I've seen what works well, but I also seen things that some challenges along the way. So super excited about the topic.
Yeah, thank you, Pascal. I'm super excited to have you because, like I said, I know you're an expert on-site. It's a really hot topic at the moment, and you've got the experience. You've seen what works and sometimes what doesn't work. So thank you for agreeing to share that. Before we dive into some of it, I always think I know what on-site solar is. You know, it's kind of some sort of behind-the-meter solar generation on a site. But do you want to just maybe from your sort of greater expertise just cover that? Have I got that right? Is that what on-site solar is, or is it more subtle than that?
No, but you're right. You're absolutely right. But it has different names, I think, for the same thing. But for our discussion today, I think we can call it on-site. We can call it behind the meter. It is also called sort of distributed generation. So I think that we can use that sort of interchangeably. So that's fine. Sometimes it's even private wire, direct line can also be part of that. And it can be a rooftop installation. It can be a ground mount installation. It can be a carport. So it can be different things. But 2 things I think are key when we talk about this topic. It is that from a savings perspective, we're offsetting non-commodity costs and commodity. And the other important thing here is we're actually producing and consuming at the site, which has a lot of benefits, which I'm sure we'll get into. So for me, that would be how we sort of frame the on-site discussion today.
That's great, and I love that. It's one of the things I love about this industry is why should we have one name for something when we can have? I lost track. Sorry, I was counting them up, but it was like 4 or 5 different names. But that's really helpful. So you kind of teased me a little bit with the importance of it, and you were saying about avoiding non-commodity charges, and again from a lot of my sort of history in the UK, I kind of understand that, but can you give me a sort of rundown then of why on-site is so relevant and so important today?
For sure. Yeah, and I think and Alight actually started with on-site solar back in 2014 it was. So this is true for the UK and it's true for most sort of European countries. If we look at an electricity bill from, let's say 10 years ago in 2016 and we look at it today, there's one thing that sort of will stand out across the board, and that is the sort of increase of non-commodity costs. And that could be network tariffs, system charges, or different taxes. And these have been increasing and are continuing to increase. So that has just made on-site solar more relevant than ever. And that's one sort of key factor that I think we're seeing. But in addition to that, why I obviously been doing this for a couple of years now, but there's some new things that have happened as well. And one is sort of the addition of storage. Because when we started a couple of years back, it was a solar only thing. Today, we model all our installation with BESS, and that's what, if you look at the decreasing cost of BESS, it's sort of decreased dramatically. So that's one thing. And on the other side, sort of the revenues from BESS has also increased, whether it's behind the meter revenues or actually in front of the meter BESS revenues. So I think that's two things that makes it more relevant than other. And yeah, there's a few others as well if we want to go into that.
Actually, that's really interesting. I think people who've listened to my podcast before will know, and I've probably said this before, I'm old enough to remember when the energy was the biggest part of the bill, and the non-commodity and the policy costs were just this thing. And when they kind of came up to equal, you think, oh, okay. And like you say now, there's such a big chunk of cost in some geographies. That it is, it's such a big part of the cost. If I'm not putting you on the spot here, Pascal, would you say that in your experience or in your view, anywhere in Europe is a bit of a hotspot for on-site? Is there anywhere where, if someone's listening and they're in a particular place, they should be ringing you now?
I think you're there, right? I think one of the hottest market funds, which is sometimes surprising, right, is the UK. So I like to contrast Spain and UK as an example. We do on-site solar in both cases because they do the sort of a good business case, while Spain perhaps is a bit more obvious, right? High solar radiation, which makes for a good case. But UK, Poland are two countries where this sort of non-commodity part just takes a bigger part of the electricity bill. And I think when you enter into a PPA or so, one of the things you need to consider, right? What is the forecast? And while we know electricity is volatile, non-commodity are not, so they are steadily increasing. And so there are a few markets such as UK, which makes this sort of more relevant than others, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting. That I guess that's why I thought it was interesting. You said Poland. I think maybe that one was one I had as maybe slipped through. But I suppose because I'm here and I see bills. You kind of I thought that was so it's interesting. Again, if it's not a too much of a tricky question, you mentioned the inclusion of batteries, BESS in those installations is now much more prevalent. What would your view be in terms of the sort of additional benefits to people doing that over than just maybe saying, oh, well, we'll just, we'll do a solar array?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And the addition of BESS adds complexity and which is fun, but interesting. So I think while we on the grid connected side, we see solar and BESS as a natural sort of they go hand in hand nowadays. I think you could look at BESS behind the meter in different ways. And the way Alight and myself look at it is if you add a BESS to behind the meter installation, you can increase self-consumption. So that goes directly into your business case. You can consume more of that sort of cheap electricity on site. Some geographies, you can do tariff optimization. Again, UK stands out, Italy, Germany, where you can do these sort of behind the meter benefits or just pure arbitrage, right? So those are revenue stacks for the BESS that just adds to the solar and self-consumption benefits. And we believe those are, long-term valid and have a lot of value. Then, of course, what you can do with the BESS behind the meter is you can participate in ancillary market. Again, that sort of forecast is perhaps a bit more uncertain and volatile. So our view is really on the behind the meter BESS aspects of it. But basically, you multiply the benefits, or you sort of
That's just really interesting, and I get that it adds a degree of complexity. Hopefully, should we say, if people are listening and thinking, sounds great, that sounds quite hard. Hopefully, if I ask you the question, it's not as hard as perhaps it sounds. you can get you sort of how there are ways of doing it. There are people who can manage it. There's expertise to grab. It's not just going to be like we stick it all on here, we stick that there, and you're like, off you go then.
Yeah, so good. It is complex, but I think you're absolutely right. There are experts and there's an ecosystem of players. I think with BESS, it's sort of that ecosystem of partners is just becoming bigger. And uh, you can do an on-site PPA, you can do CapEx, and it's the same as actually, it's for the BESS, right? You could use your own money to invest in a BESS. You could use an as a service model. But then again, the added complexity is those added revenues or the uncertainties around them, and how do you split that? And that's obviously an interesting commercial discussion. Who takes the risk and the upside? Do you share it, or is it just a leasing? And that's where it becomes commercially as well very interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. I've seen the growth in the ecosystem, great word that you say there, to help people. And I would say this. I don't think it's as hard as perhaps it looks when people look from the outside in. As a result, if that makes sense, and when you get into it and you look at it, you can make decisions. And I've seen some corporates who say, I've got, should we say, connection or usage challenges that BESS obviously fixes. I can store energy. Other times there's like, yeah, well, I'm gonna, as you said, you could call it arbitrage, but essentially I can store energy from those cheap periods when the solar's running, and I can stash it away and use it overnight, or I can use it at my peak time and get even more benefit. Some of it's, dare I say, sort of simple, or simpler than you think. So okay, all that's really exciting. I guess my next question to you is around the how. So how does it work? How do I as a corporate potentially tap into this, get it done?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, for me, I think it starts with the business case, and it also goes back to what you just said about the type of site, because there are many different corporates, and depending on how your consumption profile looks like, where your sites are, your flexibility in terms of that, it's also an important factor. But I would say, it starts with the business case. So for on-site solar, that's true for many things, but that's number one. And at the same level of that, I think what is super interesting is the stakeholder engagement that is required to get an on-site solar installation across, because there are a varied of different team members that need to collaborate in order to get it done, because it's procurement, it's sustainability, it's the facility, it's the insurance, it's finance, treasury. I could go on and on, but if you get that one wrong, you're not going to have solar or BESS on your sites.
Do you know what? I love it, Pascal. You've said exactly what I've sort of seen and heard. You look at it and you think, does it stack up for us? And sometimes you have to ask some questions. And then I agree. I almost don't care whether it's on-site or off-site PPA. That stakeholder piece is crucial. It's, if you're the lead for something like this, and you'll know it, won't you? You need to get the finance, the head of finance. You need to get her on board. You need to get the sustainability. The ops guys and girls who are running the plant want to know you're not going to break what they're doing and everything else. There's so many bits to be, there's legal insurance. There's so many pieces, and I think sort of reaching out and getting that information to bring all that together always, to me, pays dividends. In terms of doing that. I think that's I just, yeah, and plug, you can talk to organizations like us, you can talk to to people like you with that experience, and make it happen, and figure it out. So I think that's good. So very briefly, if I said to you, what's the biggest pitfall and what's the kind of biggest sort of tip for getting it right, what would your advice be, maybe?
Yeah, so risk of repeating myself, I will come back to the two things, but I think on-site solar should be part of your procurement and renewable strategy. So it's not, it's not solving everything. Depending on who you are, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25% of your load, right? So it's part of your strategy. But I think, and what we've seen, the one that have been successful is they incorporate that in the strategy, but you also look at it multi-site, or you look at the big ones, because if you add many sites together, the savings number, the sustainability number will be big enough to get the attention. It will sort of get the place it deserves. So I think that again, it comes back to creating that business case, and we like to say, look at it from a portfolio perspective. Make sure you have a core team that is willing to do this. And then, to put it simple, you start with a pilot and then you replicate. And I've been working with an American automotive supplier now, and they started with a rooftop installation in Spain. So they, tested it, and then we helped them deploy the same commercial agreement across multiple sites and multiple countries in Europe. So their organization learned, we learned, and it sort of was just a copy paste. So I think, it's those two things that sort of you need to have with you.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Thank you. And again, it makes a lot of sense. I particularly, like you said, it seems obvious when you say it, but you're an expert. To do the pilot and prove it works is just you don't just roll it out everywhere, but you can show that it's a thing. And like with any enterprise, isn't it? It's getting the plan right, getting everything together. That's really good.
And I think it's not we come back to that complexity. It's not one thing that is more complex. It's just that there's a lot of things you need to consider. So they are so important. So if you get one of them wrong, it can jeopardize the whole project. And for rooftop, for example, one very important one that I have seen and can sometimes create a lot of issues down the line is, the insurance requirement. If you didn't capture them up front, worst case, and we've seen it, there are, those projects will not happen because you missed some crucial elements of insurance, which of course is critical. But as an example, so I think that's the trick, to get them all listed up front.
I love it. And again, it makes sense as why you need to, why it's helpful to speak to someone with that experience like you've got, to say, actually, I've done this, and don't forget the insurance. It's like when I say to people, when you do a PPA, the first thing to do is get everyone to sit down in a room and get on the same page. It sounds obvious, but get all those questions out and make sure everyone understands it. In this case, I guess it's like, you understand what rooftop solar is, what it's going to do, how we're going to work, what we're going to do, get everybody there, and then it gets easier because everyone's talking about the same thing. No one's making any assumptions. No, I love it. Pascal, I've really enjoyed having you on. I could talk to you all day. I'm conscious we're getting on. I do hope at some point you'll come on again, and we'll dive into some other bits and pieces. So once again, thank you. I don't know if there's anything you want to throw out before we wrap up, I guess.
No, it was a pleasure, and I think we've scratched the surface of on-site solar, and there's so many more angles and deep dives we could do. Anything from data center to private wire to looking into specific countries and so on. But it was a great discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. I've really enjoyed it, and I've learned lots as well, which is what I love. And I'm guessing if anyone's listening, obviously they know they can get in touch with you. They can get in touch with me. But I think if anyone's got suggestions for deep dives about something that's interesting, I'm good to hear them. And then I can talk to you, Pascal, and see if I can convince you to do this all over again. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Sounds like a plan.
That was a brilliant podcast, and thanks again to Pascal for joining me. If you're interested in any of the things that Pascal's talked about today, feel free to reach out to Pascal Olin at Alight,
Alternatively, if you are interested in on-site, you can reach out to me or Des Connolly here at Zygo Network and find out how we can help you with anything from planning to tendering for on-site solar. Thanks for listening.